brands that are there. When it comes to Synology, I think, let's get it out of the way. If we had to subtitle this video, if this was a trailer, which would be weird, it was on a big poster and there had to be a little subtitle, it would be software, software, software versus hardware, hardware, hardware. Hello and welcome back, and that's right, we're going to tackle the big one today. We've talked about it before, but not like this. Today, we're going to talk about Synology and QNAP, and myself and Luka over on BlackVoid, I believe he's over that side there, we are going to debate these two brands. We're going to do the classic style debating round where we're going to talk about, what we consider the pros, what we love about these respective brands, and hopefully try to, if not change the other person's mind, then maybe you at home are going to, watch this video and think, there's more to this and it's not that black and white as we thought. But before we go any further, Luka, let's explain to the audience, one, who you are and your experience with Synology. Over to you.
Well, thank you for having me once again, Robbie. I'm obviously Luka, owner of BlackVoid, and as a recent official media partner. But everything that I'm going to say today has accumulated over the last 15 years of my Synology experience. So this isn't actually driven by Synology as a company, but actually my humble points and views. And I've been solely invested into Synology brand, although have had tackled the QNAP both hardware and software wise, but not as of version 4, I have to say. So I am lacking on that end. So I'm very happy to hear your side of things, and that's about it.
Fantastic. Well, I think we should let the viewing public know how this is going to go down. So, nice and simple. We're going to sort of take it in turns to talk about some standout points from the respective brands. These can be hardware, these can be software, they can be, extras, they can be absolutely anything. And then it's going to come down to the other person to kind of debate that point a little bit. There's a sense of drama in the air. And of course, it is worth a few disclaimers straight off the bat, much like Luka there. I've quite well versed in the field of network attached storage. I've been dealing with the majority of the brands in the field for quite a few years now. I think it would be fair to say that I love things and dislike things about most of the brands that are there. When it comes to Synology, I think, let's get it out of the way. If we had to subtitle this video, if this was a trailer, which would be weird, it was on a big poster and there had to be a little subtitle, it would be software, software, software versus hardware, hardware, hardware. Unfortunately, that is going to be the subtext, and it's pretty much going to be the foretext for the majority of this video, because frankly, even though I'm obviously, in the case of this video at least, going to be pleading for the side of QNAP, let's face it, DSM is still the dog's nadgers when it comes to software in the world of network attached storage. The ecosystem, the smooth, there's that word ecosystem, get ready to hear that a lot. The smoothness of the platform, just generally the responsiveness for it, the utility, the fact that they've got first-party apps for everything. I cannot go into this video and not say that I don't think DSM is an absolute powerhouse of software, because it damn well is, but there is more to the world of network attached storage, hence this comparison. But I just thought it very important to get that out of the way early doors before we start having this debate, and a lot of people go, you said lots of horrible things about Synology. So, straight off the bat, I think let's open it up. Over to you, Luka. What is your first big point? I feel I might know what it is already, but go for it. What's your first big point?
Well, big point for Synology. I'm just going to do a little bit of intro, why that is. So bear with me, considering I'm not a fast talker like you, obviously. For me, back in the day, when I was actually looking into a NAS solution for myself, I've obviously QNAP and Syno in 2007-8 were already showing promises on both ends. But on both their hardware and software elements. But for me, it was just Synology that won that battle. It was neatly packed. It was more sort of user-friendly. It checked all my boxes at that time. And over the next decade, I guess the main thing, even today, especially today for all the viewers and all the users, is the security element. In my opinion, security is something that it's absolute, that needs to be number one on everybody's list. And although Synology, as well as QNAP and all the other brands in the recent years have had issues, I think that after Synology in 2014, end of 2013, 2014, August, I believe, Synology really stepped up in that department and continued on that path, which is something that has given me ensured me that they're not gonna, mess up
Yeah,
along the
drop the
way.
ball again.
Maybe they will, but they will definitely focus on that. Also, they have established that PSRRT, the Product Security Incident Response Team. I actually had to write it down to remember it.
Same here. Don't worry.
Yeah, just to keep on top of all the active zero-day exploits and all the CVE issues that are out there. So for me, security is number one, and I believe, looking just over the course of last year, that QNAP was a little bit more exposed than any other brand out there.
I do have some kind of stats on that, and you are bang on the banana. Just going by their security advisory, QNAP reported 31 different security vulnerabilities during that period. A lot of them were Linux based, and again, what do you do find when you look at the advisory? And again, I'm talking to you guys at home with the advisory pages. Often, what you find on there is a vulnerability within Linux, with a particular version of Linux, which then gets patched by Linux, and then other brands and software that are built on Linux will then implement those updates into those improvements and fixes into their own respective platforms. So there was 31 on QNAP, but there was also 26 on Synology last year. Now, none of them were the same scale as Deadbolt. Let's get that out of the way. Yeah. Deadbolt was their Synology, but the problem QNAP have obviously faced is it's happened too much, and their response to it has not been good enough. There was the forced updates there, and I know you guys are thinking, aren't you supposed to be on QNAP's side in this video? Their response to it was frankly woefully inadequate by comparison to how Synology responded to Synology. And I think you were pretty much dancing around the point I was going to make, which was that with Synology, that was Synology's big headache, nightmare, potential brand killer scenario, and they clearly learned from that. And you mentioned the PSIRT, checks he spelt it right, and the likes of their bounty program. They've been running a bounty program. QNAP have just instituted one. Why taking so long? And of course, they even participated, Synology, in Pwn to Own, the big event every year. I think it's in Toronto. You might have to correct me in the comments. It's things like that I love about that Synology and security platform. Now, hopefully, this incident with Deadbolt is QNAP's Synology. I really hope it is, because they need to learn from that. And they've probably made more implemented changes into their platform after Deadbolt than anything else I've seen before. Everything from admin account disabling to all extraneous external access being shut down unless needed otherwise. The presentation, which was woefully inadequate, I would say, prior to Deadbolt, of allowing people to just smash holes through with port forwarding in their firewall without real consequences, and even some applications not functioning to their fullest without the latest update on there, something that really is only on its home on console gaming. So again, I would love to try to argue with you on the sense of security there in case of QNAP, but unfortunately, we're in the wars, we're in the trenches as far as looking at QNAP as a brand and security. They have to take their lumps, and I can't sit here and defend QNAP on that stance until a good, I would say at least 3 to 4 years go by on case of QNAP. They are moving forward, they have made implemented changes, but until I see, much like yourself, 3+ years there, I can't comfortably say to you to camera that I consider QNAP safer than Synology. I can't. I'd love to, but I can't. I think it is. I think it's safer than it was, but Synology have clearly taken on board the lessons they needed to learn, and particularly, again, PSRT, Pwn to Own, bounty programs, and even though both platforms have got the vulnerability and security advisories, I still feel like if you look at the list and the ones that are common across both of them, that are Linux-based vulnerabilities that have been found outside of the native NAS OS, then they've had to adapt. Once you move outside of those, the standalone vulnerabilities that are independent to either platform, they're denser and worse on the QNAP ones, the ones that have appeared. Again, deadbolt. But I think
I would just one more point on Synology when it actually occurred. I know that a lot of my colleagues were, really, that happened? And if you look at why it actually happened, because users that weren't patched up at that point, which was kind of solved by Synology in December 2013, those that were patched didn't feel a thing. But considering the people were opening the boxes, having them unpatched, and didn't go through the security advisor checklist, obviously, but I guess you have to crash a car, right? So a few times before you actually learn something. So I'm just sort of defending Synology on this point, but a lot of Synology incidents were actually users to blame. I mean,
I'm sure I sound repetitious here on the channel, but it's oft said by myself and Eddie, like, the majority, and I know it sounds awful, but the majority, if you look at 1 or 2 decades of storage, particularly network storage, the majority of instances of malware and vulnerability have not come down to the software itself. It has come down, as you say, to updates not being filled, people getting a NAS, connecting it, put it in the corner of their office, not instituting automatic updates. Again, I'm still looking at a bubble on the bottom right of my screen that says, I can get Windows 11 if I want. Go away. I will take necessary security updates and that's it. But there's lots of users that have bought a NAS, set it up for 3 to 4 years, stuck it in the corner, and then they've been hit because they're not getting network updates, which, again, this isn't a blame game, but there's a big part of the responsibility on the end user, so you're absolutely right. But even then, I think with Deadbolt, there was still an area of the vulnerability not being acted upon quick enough, and I agree with you that there is an element of user responsibility versus brand responsibility, but I don't think we can let QNAP off too easy on that one. But this is turning way, way, way too much into we're both on Synology's side in this comparison. Let's move it forward and switch over to my side here, because if we're going to get the obvious stuff out the way, and I say the obvious like it's flippant, the hardware. When it comes down to it, he's sitting there taking his lumps, because the thing is, this sounds really overtly critical, but when you are buying these solutions, they are combined hardware software solutions, and a keyword solution there, and Synology most certainly, for every £100 you spend, I can't help but feel that every £100 on a Synology, minimum £60 of that, probably close to 70, is going towards DSM, and arguably 30% of that is going straight towards active backup. More on that later. But the hardware on Synology's platforms, unless you go elite level enterprise, and even then it still seems to be in the 60-40 bracket, the hardware just feels a little bit underwhelming, and it's sometimes, I will argue that it's because they're staying within a budget remit. I get that, but and again, going by my notes, when you can, for the same money, get 2 4-bay NASs, and the Synology one has got 1 or 2 USB old gen ports, it's got 2 1GBE ports, it's got a proprietary network upgrade slot, and a CPU that has had an element of controversy behind it for some multimedia users, and for the same money over here, you will be able to buy something that's got USB 10 gigabits per second, 2.5 GBE, 2 of those ports, same price, support of traditional PCI upgrade cards, HDMI 2.1 support and KVM support, and just support of M2 NVMEs for a multitude of different supported uses, not just caching, as well as support of Google's AI-supported upgrade card. That's the same money. So in terms of hardware, I've never really quite understood the Synology position on hardware there. I mean, for yourself, how do you feel about Synology hardware?
Yeah, you're really, hitting me there. I just can't say anything back. I mean, it's clear as day, obviously. And yes, Synology tends to be more expensive, I'm guessing you were comparing or referring to 923 just now.
Only because it's the most recent release, but if you move away, even from the 9.2, like at the moment, it's coming out on the channel a little while. I've got these new, the 6.2 series, dual-core Intel Celeron device. And it's, I wish I had my notes still up there, but there's the 2-bay, The 2-bay, it's 389 Nika here in the pounds in the UK. Someone's going to give me some stick for that in the comments. And it's a dual-core new-gen Celeron. It's 2.5 GBE. It's got a PCI upgrade slot. It's got 2 M2 slots. It's got USB 10 gig. It's got HDMI 2.1, and it's 399. And of course, the big counter-argument is you're paying for DSM more than you are for the hardware, and you've got to factor in the value of that experience. Of course, it's true. But there are users out there that aren't going to use that software to its full extent, aren't going to be active backup in surveillance station. And therefore, for those users, hardware, they're going to feel a bit shortchanged. I mean, for you, if I had to say, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here, and it's a bit of a hospital pass, but if you were to pick a Synology off the top of your head with hardware that impressed you, what would it be?
Well, I have to say that the most recent one was 923 or 723, just because everything above everything rack station related is for the end user is probably an overkill, right? So if we focus down on the DS, the desktop stations, I really think that 918, 920 were really close, nothing too much there. Why somebody would upgrade from X18 to X20. But the 23 model, although yes, AMD in there, and you're losing hardware transcoding and whatnot, what you touched on. I mean, the overall package, I think that the 923 has started to shift outside the expected zone where 920 and 918 will be, and I was really happy with that, just because you have out of the box 32 gigabytes of RAM,
ECC as well. ECC,
right. You have a more powerful CPU than the generation before. I'm not going towards QNAP because there's no competition there, obviously. You do have proprietary 10G, but finally 10G. I'm all for 10G. I really, because you're not putting me actually on the spot. I'm actually glad you are. But for me, 2.5, 5G, that's a no-go, right? It's either 1G for me or 10G. So maybe I'm not the average user that would say, look, 2.5G should have been already 3-4 years in a row implemented, But for me, I really like that they went with the proprietary 10G, that they finally implemented 10G to something that's not a 6-bay or an XS unit or an RS unit. And the fact that they've implemented that in 720 or in a 2-bay is, I'm really happy. I'm really happy with those two devices. But I really can't argue that QNAP for years has been the superior one when it comes to overall hardware specs. And I'm sure that the enthusiasts out there, people that are not actually looking for software elements or turnkey solutions when it comes to backup, they just want a powerful NAS unit that has a lot of horsepower and input-output elements and whatnot, ports and whatnot. QNAP is definitely a better choice, obviously.
The only thing I would add to that, while I quickly double-check that we are definitely still recording this on OBS, because I got paranoid part of the way through that, the only thing I would add to that, and again, it's to do with the 2.5G debate, and I've discussed it in other videos, so I'll keep it very, very brief. I barely use 2.5GB in my home life. I do use it here in the studio, and one of the reasons I do that is because the router that I use, I have an office provided router that had 2.5 GBE. It's an ISP router with 2.5G, and on top of that, we're seeing more devices arrive on the scene with 2.5 GBE at the same cost as 1 GBE. Ergo, having 1 GBE seems like a conscious choice. And when it comes to like adapters, I've talked about on the channel before, these are like $20, if that. And therefore, upgrading your client hardware to 2.5 times network speed, when making the jump to 10 GBE, is more expensive, and you need to have the media to saturate it with. And with that adapter, I do, like yourself, at first when I learned about this adapter, I didn't like it. I think I was quite clear about it on the channel, because I was like, oh, I don't like a proprietary 10G. I don't like this idea that, I've got 10 GBE, but I've got to do it this way. But over time, and particularly within the first month, one, it is the easiest 10G upgrade I've ever installed in my life. And secondly, it's the idea that there are users out there that want to scale up, and the option to just sling that in, power down, power up, they're going to, that lack of downtime, knocking around with drivers, it's really, really good news, and not have to muck around with support and stuff. But by the same token, it's really expensive. Have you seen how much that thing costs? And I know I sound like I'm being Mr. Penny Pinchy happy shopper.
150 euros, something like that.
Well, that's where it was. And I don't know if it's an availability or hardware shortage thing. I've seen the prices all over the place in different regions when I've seen traditional standard class PCIe upgrade cards knocking around for 80 nicker. It's kind of really annoying. But anyway, look, we've harboured the hardware point there quite a lot. I think we've got the obvious two things out, obvious 2.5 things out the way. Over to you, to your next point.
Well, tying into my first point, which was obviously security, from my point of view, something that I would suggest to people to go to Synology versus QNAP was something that is related to stability. So security turning into stability in terms of DSM stability as an OS. Obviously, it's more fluent, especially in DSM-7. Stability of packages. I believe that certain applications and platforms are more mature on the Synology side. There's just simply more of them, more client applications as well, for mobile phones, for tablets and whatnot.
Fire TV. It's crazy.
Yeah. And it just feels that Synology sometimes is a little bit slower to market than QNAP. Maybe that's the reason why certain problems arise on the QNAP side more often. But on the other hand, we were waiting for DSM-7 a really long time. So Synology is not innocent in this as well, right? So I'm not saying it's perfect, but I just have a sense of feel that it's a bit more stable. We're not going to rush it. We're going to let users get angry at us because we're not handing over the new features fast enough. But we're not going to sacrifice on stability, security, and whatnot. Although they do tend to mess up in certain applications and whatnot. But okay, there's a lot to cover. A lot of applications, a lot of platforms, DSM alone, hardware, and so forth. So,
I mean,
but stability in general.
I've got to say, I mean, again, I am going to struggle to argue with you on that because it's not only an eloquent point, it's an inarguable point. First and foremost, applications on the Synology DSM platform remain in beta for longer than any other brand I've seen, which they wouldn't do that for no reason. Obviously, they're collecting public data, usage data for improvement. And it's the same thing with, it's the whole tortoise and the hare scenario where QNAP will often bring certain services to bat very, very early as killer apps, but they could sometimes do with a lot more time in the oven, you know what I mean? And there's just often the case that Synology will roll out a software, QNAP will roll out a software, Synology don't, and then it's kind of a little bit shaky, but of course they've taken it out of beta a little bit too early, then Synology will bring their entry, which often doesn't have the fully fledged features of the QNAP one there, but the ones it has are very, very solid, as you say. And again, the responsiveness of DSM, the amount of money. I would love to speak to someone at Synology and actually get a figure of how much money was specifically targeted towards UX design and just general GUI behavior patterns, because it is intuitive as hell, but also responsive. And it's that feeling of local versus remote. I had a debate with Eddie a short while ago about when you play, and again, sorry to make a computer game comparison, I'm 5, but when you play a computer game at 30 frames per second and you've never played it in any other frame rate for the whole time, and all of a sudden one day you play it at 60 frames per second and then you go back to 30, and then you go, what the hell is this? And it's very much the case, because when you use the Synology platform, it doesn't feel like you're using remote. The amount of data being held by local browser cache must be phenomenal, and the amount of optimization and efficiency going in there is phenomenal. And when you use QTS, you feel like you are dealing with something remote. A lot of the time, you know, you can go quite a long way without feeling that. But it's, as you say, sometimes the responsiveness doesn't feel, the latency seems a little bit more increased. And we're talking, you know, ms here, milliseconds, but it's enough. And the design of all applications within QNAP don't always seem to sit at the same level, and you'll be opening certain tabs and windows, and the design and the in-house style, there's suddenly a fractious difference between how they're presented. And it was very much a case when QTS 5 first rolled out. Yes, it was in beta, but there was tremendous differences in the portrayal and the presentation of certain apps and windows between QTS in different first-party apps as well. I mean, the only thing I would then argue against this, I think is a reasonable argument, is you're right. Synology, with their applications there, are, you know, fully fledged and they look beautiful and they've spent more time in the oven. But often they can feel a lot more limited. They can feel a lot of the configuration options are either hidden or just flat out not accessible. And at least when the QNAP ones come out, a lot of the time they are far more configurable to the end user, sometimes to their detriment, going back to point number one there.
I would just like to give an example here on the Synology side. I mean, a recent addition, a recent deprecation of all apps and publishing a new one, Synology Photos, was one example that when it rolled out, people were satisfied, but not overly happy because they lost certain elements from Photo Station and professionals were really angry, which was later on added as a subsequent updates to Synology Photos, but not out the gate. So it felt kind of, wow, you gave us new thing, but you robbed us of certain things that we had before, which is something that maybe Synology could have avoided, but maybe it was a specific decision for whatever reason. But yeah,
I kind of wish they hadn't basically put in Photos and removed the other two apps, because this actually touches on one of my points, which I'll just load straight into right now. And it's when we talk about software on the QNAP platform. As you say, there are just some, when I talk about the features that are missing, to really focus straight in on Photos there. So QNAP still has Photo Station. It has Photo Station and QMaggie. Awful name, running side by side. And QMaggie, its AI recognition, recognises more targets. It has a broader definition of AI photo recognition. And moreover, it has thing recognition, which still, to date, I don't understand why Synology Moments doesn't have it. I've never had a clear answer. And when it comes to AI photo recognition, I do want facial recognition, and I do want scraped metadata to give me geolocational data. I really want that, and both of them provide that. But whereas Synology Moments had thing recognition, so if I'm looking for a certain thing, an item, a target, a subject, why did Moments have that? And Synology Photos, after 2 years, still doesn't. And when you do rightly say that Synology did roll in some of the options and configuration choices of Synology Photos, Photo Station even, into Synology Photos. Not all. Key word. And it's... And I still don't... For me, that almost feels like a conscious choice not to include those, and I don't know why. I'd love to get a clear answer, but it rolls out more than that on software. So when it comes to surveillance, on the Synology platform, you've got, obviously, Surveillance Station on Synology is still the best surveillance software. And I'm not even going to argue with that either. The fact that I can still access it, it's better. It's more responsive, it's better. It's got some of the improvements that are on it. It's a more responsive app. And the QNAP one, QVR Pro, heavily reliant on the use of the client applications rather than just the browser, and I think the Synology surveillance platform is the better of the two. However, if I want to use Synology AI services, I have to use one of their AI-powered NAS, of which there's 3, and they are frighteningly expensive for most home or even prosumer small business users, whereas on the QNAP platform, you've got facial recognition available on even a Celeron base, and we've seen it's possible because Synology rolled out a 2-bay DVA NAS that has no graphics card. It has a Celeron inside, so we know it's possible. You can use the AI upgrade for the QNAP platform. You have 8 camera licenses, not 2. There's just a lot. There's lots of little tiny things that add up on that QNAP side, that although it's not the better software overall, it still has a lot of those features included. And it moves on when you look at other applications, say File Station. Both platforms have got the file manager platform called File Station. Ooh, awkward. And the Synology one, obviously, because Synology has got that single ecosystem, they have their own Office, the collaboration suite, chat, love chat. They've got mail, got all of those different calendar and note station, all that stuff. That wonderful combined platform. And yes, there are migration tools and improvements coming in DSM 7.2 for Synology Office to be a lot more compatible with a lot of Windows templates and Windows formats. But QNAP have just got a Windows Office plugin. So when you open an app, when you open a doc in File Station on a QNAP, it just opens in Office. So it'll open in Spreadsheet, in Word, it'll open in, all of those different tools. And it's just little things like that, little tiny things that QNAP do that either they're not advertising well enough, aren't stable enough at launch, that they then have to patch in and repair and make better. But it's things that I'm surprised Synology don't also do. And sometimes I would wonder whether they do that because of that single I'm not going to say agenda, but that single ecosystem deployment method, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you've touched on a lot of elements now that, in my point of view, are both plus and minuses. Obviously, I mean, surveillance station is by far the best surveillance station in that range of devices. But of course, 2,600 pounds or euros or whatnot for a 3221 device is quite a steep price. True. We'll see what the new cameras will bring in, right?
Of course.
This summer when they come up, maybe certain things will change. But I would have to agree on the application side. I mean, that turnkey solution that when you get a box, right? Because you're buying an appliance, right? You're not buying a computer that you're going to assemble yourself and they're going to put certain NAS software on top of it. I don't want to get into it, but when you're buying an appliance, you're buying an experience, right? And that experience needs to be stable, secure, and as much as possible feature rich, right? For the customer, right? And I think that Synology versus QNAP is just better. I mean, Synology in that department as a whole, as an experience for the end user, especially not an enthusiast level user, okay, is better. Yes, lacking on hardware elements that we touched on, but on software, I think it's definitely ahead in general. But what you mentioned, Note Station, for instance, Note Station was one of my favorite applications on DSM, at least one of top 5 applications, but they've just abandoned it. I mean, no development on it, no updates, nothing's happening, and I'm just feeling that it's gonna get axed, right?
DS Video's got a little whiff of that as well.
Oh yeah. Especially with the AMD platform now creeping in. I mean, they're actually not advertising at all, and I'm also worried, questioning what's going to happen with, for instance, Video Station as well, considering the competition in that department, Plex, Jellyfin, whatnot. Yeah. And I agree with the overall collaboration platform, the Office and mail and chat and whatnot. Yeah, Synology Drive by far, that's one of the most used application as a Google Drive or Dropbox alternative for syncing and backing up and whatnot. But it's not all bells and whistles on Synology, obviously, but yeah, from a software point of view, I think they're definitely ahead. Yeah,
I'll say, I mean, real quick off, I'm pretty sure this video is going to run into quite a few hours, and I think that's okay. If we're going to do this, let's do it right.
Sure.
About 2 days ago, a subscriber to the channel, Brian Free. If you're watching this, hi, Brian. We were having a debate about, he was a long-time Synology user that was dipping his toes into QNAP, and he highlighted a feature that was absent, which he naturally just assumed that was there, and that was full system image backup. And it was something that just isn't really a thing on QNAP's side, which again, I kind of in my head was like, that's a thing, right? And I had to properly dig into it, because I knew it wasn't a thing a few years ago, but I naturally just assumed the way they had gone with a lot of their backup software, it had arrived, and it still hasn't arrived. And of course, that leads us in to probably one of the most powerful and useful tools, arguably almost worth the price of admission on a lot of QNAP devices, Active Backup. Active Backup on its own is so good for Synology. And again, I know a lot of QNAP people are going to go, what are you doing backing them up? Well, just hear me out, right? Active Backup is probably, I would say, the best application Synology have ever rolled out. And more importantly, they know it. I worry, though, that it is influencing how they develop the rest of their platform. Because, as you say, there are certain tools that seem to be getting a little bit less attention. And Active Backup is getting bigger and better, and Drive is getting, they're fantastic. Oh, we're adding 9 new features. But I worry about the detrimental effect of such a great application as Active Backup on the rest of the Synology, I would argue, home prosumer portfolio of people that are buying into that ecosystem when they have a range of, say, 10 tools, and 4 of them are out of this world, and the other ones, less so. You know what I mean? And we could fill this whole video with Active Backup. Maybe we'll do a follow-up video to that about why it's so fantastic. But I'll let you move on to your next point.
Well, actually, maybe one other element that I've might add. Again, it doesn't reflect on Synology NAS, but as Synology as a brand is my final point, and that would be C2, C2 Cloud. Now, C2 has been in their portfolio for quite some time. I've been actually a beta user since C2 storage, as they call it now, has rolled out, considering the first data center was in Germany, in Europe, so it was close to me. But I think that that's also something that's an added value by going into the Synology ecosystem, right? There are certain elements which are which will obviously cost, right? There are certain platforms which are free, some are commercial when it comes to C2. But I think that, again, that turnkey solution, right? I have a NAS and my data is on my NAS and that's backed up. No, it's not. Because if your data is on your NAS and only on your NAS, that's basically just like sitting on any other computer, so it's not backed up. And with C2, for instance, people maybe don't want to buy an additional NAS and put it at their friend's house or their office or whatnot. I think that C2 with the competitive prices and looking at Amazon and whatnot, not charging the egress fees and all that, is definitely something that is a bonus, and really added bonus for the end user to say, so I can take all my backups, all my data, and just back it up to the cloud, and that's it. And on top of that, certain services in C2 portfolio don't even require you to have a Synology NAS when it comes to backing up your computer and whatnot. So I think that C2 as a platform is just a great addition as ABB on bare metal, right? But that is one of my final points when it comes to Synology.
I mean, I've got a couple more points on the QNAP side, but just before we get to that, I'll definitely dig into, because one, I agree with pretty much 95% of what you said there. I mean, one, I've said this before in other videos, and I'll say it again. Maybe you're listening, Synology, hello. Why do they not include an area of space inclusive with the NAS? I've never understood that. As a little taste, because there's a lot of users that instantly get the NAS and go, wait, I've got to pay more for that, get lost. And it's, if they just included even a small amount of space for all Synology users as a lovely little taste, the same way all of the providers do maybe with mobile phones and stuff, where they give you a little bit of space as a little taster, which you then end up filling up and going, well, my data's on there now, I better fill it. I'm not saying to use such a manipulative and cynical tactic as that, but ultimately I think a lot of users would buy into that for one, although there are lots of benefits to that, and obviously if you want to go for full disaster recovery, you're going to talk terabytes. But leading on from that, because the one service that I thought that I have a personal C2 subscription with my Synology NAS at home, but I'll be straight with you. One, it was never provided by Synology, just to keep that clear. But secondly, I only got it, I would argue, about 4 months ago because of C2 surveillance. Not because of anything else, but because of C2 surveillance. And it's little things like that. I think Synology could stand to include a better way to present C2 cloud storage to users. And I'm sure they have discussed the merits or downfalls of including a little bit of free space for everyone, even if it's on the first 2 to 3 years or whatever, license led. It would get people in a lot more there. But the cloud, as you say, you've done really well not to use the word ecosystem, and I'm going to do it again. But that idea of the Synology turnkey ecosystem to get a solution that can then expand out is fantastic there. And C2 was a big gap. But, I mean, again, a little look behind the curtain here. But prior to this video, we didn't discuss the points that we were going to make. But we both kind of discussed one element, which I'd love to talk about. Where is the Synology switch? Why isn't there a Synology switch? Why? I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one, because QNAP have obviously taken the switch route and they have run with it. Now, don't get me wrong, there are users that are going to look at QNAP's security record over the last few years and go, not sure about that. But still, nonetheless, I think they've got something like 25, it might even be like 30, 45 switches. They've got 100 gig switches managed. They've even got dual purpose and switches that are NASes and switches rolled into one, with separate PSUs, separate entry points, separate power up, power down. And Synology, many years ago, rolled out the SG-1000, which, by the way, is also the name of an old Sega console. I'm a hoot at parties. And the SG-1000 they rolled out, it had, what did they call the software? It even had its own software, which eventually became SRM. But that was a network gateway device more than a switch. Yeah. But why have they never rolled out a switch? I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm chuffed about the cameras. I'm a bit meh about the storage hard drives. But where are the switches, man?
Yeah, I've again, can't argue with that. Don't know the answer to that direct question. I've never actually questioned it. But back in 2016, when RT1900 AC came out, I was like, so we're going to network, right? And I've actually thought that Synology is going to, maybe not that year, but following up with 2600 and 2200 models, that they will eventually push out at least some switches, but obviously that didn't happen. And by the looks of it, it's not going to happen. I think that QNAP is way ahead in that department. You can't argue with that. They've even started with completely new solutions, switches combined as into NASes and all that. So yeah, I think that Synology just decided to go a different route. Maybe Synology is going to come out with some new hardware that we haven't seen so far, maybe some new categories, I don't know. But I'm not really certain that network is going to be one of them.
So strange, isn't it, when you think about that whole... I mean, right, to go as far as cameras, hard drives and SSDs and routers, it's the most glaringly obvious component, which, again, if they release this year, great, but if not, why not? But yes, moving slightly forward, I've got 2 points left to discuss. So which would you rather discuss? Do you want to talk about something software related or talk about something hardware related? I'll let you decide, and if you pick the wrong one, they will let you know in the comments. Hardware, let's rip the band-aid off. All right then. SSD support on QNAP, it's so, for the most part, vastly superior on the QNAP platform over Synology that it's not even funny. Now, I could start light and just, you know, soften things up and just talk about storage pools. I mean, again, we do like that. I was going to bring this up earlier on. I do like this device, the 723. I think, again, its place in the market, as discussed, has changed. And much like the 923, it's the second NAS to roll out M2 NVMe support at PCIe 3x1 bottleneck.
Yep.
Which I still am quite perplexed by. And yes, maybe it is a temperature thing, and they're throttling those because of the performance there, and, you know, the way the chassis has been designed, it's not been... You know, there are lots of, you know, I can see the reasoning behind that. But then being 3x4 and capping at 3.1 and only giving storage pools on those devices and not the myriad of releases for the last 3 years that have got M2 NVMe slots, some of which are 3x4. I believe the unit just up there, I think that's 1621, 1621, and above it the 1522 as well. Both of those have got M2 slots. Both of them are PCIe Gen 3, and neither one of them have M2 NVMe support there. And then on top of that, on the QNAP platform, not only have you got SSD caching for read and write caching, you can do read-only caching and write-only caching. You can set the I/O levels manually to on the caching on a QNAP as well to be far more beneficial to larger sequential I/O than just standard small class 4K I/O. On top of that, you've got Q-tier, which merges the hard drives and SSDs into a single pool, sorry. And then within that pool, rather than caching, copying data, it actually intelligently learns the more frequently accessed data and physically moves it onto the SSD portions within that array. Then on top of that, you have U.2 SSD flash systems from QNAP that are kind of insanely Xeon powered and EPYC powered, whereas Synology's flash station is SATA. Is it SATA SAS or just SATA? Because they've not rolled out a Synology SAS.
They have SAS. They have SAS as well. Yeah.
But you'd have to use third-party drives to take advantage of that, with something which Synology are. I'm not going to say they're blanketly saying you can't use third-party drives, but there's a support and compatibility there. It is presenting that to a lot of users. Then you've got PCIe Gen 4 SSD support as well. So you look at a PCIe Gen 3 SSD, you're looking at 3 to 3,300 megs. PCIe Gen 4, you're looking at 7 to 7,400 megs per single SSD there. Just the SSD support is phenomenal, and it even improves once you move on to the ZFS platform, but more on that later on. Obviously, ZFS was going to poke his little head up. But I'm just really surprised that Synology, particularly as a brand that has its own range of SSDs out there, arguably more designed towards caching than storage use, arguably. A little bit more so on the SAT 5200 and 5210. But yeah, the SSD support and the broadness of SSD support on the Synology platform, it's just not as good, I find.
Not as good. I mean, well, we've both obviously seen the 23 and beyond event, and Synology is obviously rolling out their scale-out platform, which was really impressive when you look at the numbers, and it's definitely something I probably won't even touch or see ever. But when we shrink down to 4 bay, 5 bay, 6 bays, the acceptable price range devices, there's no arguing. QNAP again winning by a mile here. Also, fresh off my testing, the 723 and 923 when it comes to SSDs or NVMe in a combination with 10G, it was obvious that the throttling that they're doing on the NVMe drives was, look, we just needed to copy 1 gigabyte a second because there's 10G and that's it. So there's no need, actually. I'm kind of defending it, but if you think about it, there's really no room because 10G is going to be the choke point, right? So there's no real reason for those drives to go any faster in terms of network transfer. But local transfer, that's a whole different.
Because I was going to say, before someone in the comments jumps up and goes nuts and goes, there is, of course, the argument if you're running particularly complex databases where IOPS are king, if you're running a virtual machine locally, if you wanted to run certain applications at their very best while dealing with the warm or cold storage or the archival of the hard drives, there's a tremendous benefit to those SSDs and having them capped at 1,000 then. If you already had let's be generous, say a 6 or an 8 bay with hard drives, even mid-range to pro, you could reach 1,000 megs anyway on those drives. So the idea that you've got SSDs that are only matching that of the bays in, say, a 5 or 6 bay there, that is going to be throttling that I think would be noticed internally. You're right, externally on the device, particularly given, it is a 2 bay, so the very idea that you were going to saturate a 10G port is already quite comedic anyway, but yes, they wouldn't need those M2s to exceed that in that capacity. But with regards to internal performance, I think there's an enormous argument.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. I mean, virtualization from my end is RS units or above. All of these DS units, that's just my personal opinion. All of these DS units, they can do it, but you're basically buying an expensive box for, let's say, 1 or 2 VMs. and that's just not. It doesn't feel right. So when it comes to virtualization, it's Synology as a storage unit connected via 10G towards a hypervisor. That's how I see it. And yes, maybe that was the reason why they were throttling, because look, they're maybe going to be using maximum of 10G. There's no reason to go above that. And on the other end, catering to people that actually wanted a usable volume storage. Obviously, that comes again with a steep price tag of the Synology NVMe drives at the moment. So yeah.
I was going to say with the M2 NVMe, it's like with VMs. I think one of my again, this is my fault. No, anyway, I can't really put the blame on anyone else. Whenever I say VMs, I'm so old school in my time in network storage and traditional storage in this way. Whenever I say VM, I should really caveat I am talking containers. I'm talking every kind of virtual sandbox kind of bucket process, if you know what I mean. And I think there's a lot of people that would have used containers, because then you can almost fractionalize the hardware resources in a way that if you use standard VM, I'm going to assign some virtual threads. But yeah, sorry, I just wanted to disclaim what I said there, because I think I used the word VM there when I shouldn't really. It's
I'm a little bit more, when you say VM, I'm actually focusing on a virtual machine. Yeah. When you say containers or microservices, I'm actually focusing on the other end. So when I say VM, I'm actually thinking about a proper level 2 VM. So yeah.
I was going to say, which this actually leads quite neatly into something. I've just remembered a couple of some other things I've not talked about. One of which I'm going to skate over very, very quickly. This one, just to slide it in there, and I'm sure in the little time bar on the bottom of YouTube there, this is going on. But when it comes to support of third-party software, Synology, I would argue, because of that priority towards, I'm going to say it again, say it with me, kids, ecosystem. But because of that single turnkey, single ecosystem design, I often feel like they are purposefully not supporting some third-party software and platforms. And probably there's lots of micro instances which one could argue, well, the amount of time and energy and resources that would go into creating support of a lesser used software platform is being taken away from useful stuff. I get it, there is counter-arguments. But the fact that Hybrid Share only supports Synology C2 platform, to me, is an obvious move, where they could have supported so many bucket, object, blob storage, call it what you want, they could have, and they chose not to. QNAP does allow that with Hybrid Mount, along with a kind of reverse version of Hybrid Mount called VJBOD, which then takes storage from the NAS to allow that to be bolted onto something else in a reverse move. But it's the idea that you can't bolt on storage in that way other than C2 from Synology. It's a clear move. And the same thing goes with VMs. They clearly support VMware. They clearly support like Hyper-V and stuff like that, because they are the market leaders of SaaS platforms and hypervisor publicly used platforms there. But even when you look at the Tally and things, they're very keen on like pushing their stuff first, which is their right. It's their platform. But when you go to the QNAP alternative, their virtualization station, not only have they got their own container station standalone app, not reusing Docker, but you've got Linux Station to deploy a VM in 3 clicks on any QNAP NAS with an x86 processor. And on their virtualization station platform, there's a VM marketplace. So if you want a Windows 10, or dare I say it, a Windows 11 VM, you just go to the top, click, and it downloads a VM ready to rock. Go to the VM marketplace, there's Zabbix, there's pfSense, there's the works, there's all the different, it's that QNAP may be arguably stretching themselves a little bit too thin given the budget to the software development, but the ability to be able to support a lot more third-party platforms and integrate them, to their detriment, it has to be said, I'm sure you're about to say from time to time, is something I think that is at least worthy of note, if not worthy of praise from everyone. I quite like that about the platform.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you mentioned that, because when you compare, obviously, again, we're just tracking back a little bit, Synology versus QNAP on a software side element. Synology is slightly winning, if we can just say it overall. Yeah. So QNAP has to have a way to counter that. One way, hardware, and the other way, anywhere they can. And a single-click solution through virtualization to deploy Zabbix, why not? I mean, that's definitely something that maybe it's pulling users from Unraid as well,
Of
because
course, yeah.
Unraid also has that sort of package and app store for solutions that QNAP is also involving rolling out. So yeah, I definitely see it, and I understand why Synology is now pushing into that.
Yeah.
Just going back a little bit on third-party support, yes, they've a couple of years ago they started cleaning house, and that the reason why I see it, I'm not 100% sure. This is just my opinion. The reason why I see it is because they wanted to devote R&D time into their proprietary
Of
OS
course, yeah.
security and whatnot, and they just want to clean everything out, leave Docker support as is, and basically let people know, look, we don't want bare metal third-party applications. You're going to sandbox them as microservices into Docker or into virtual station, and that's it. And for me, from somebody who's in IT ops, in IT operations, system engineer on that level, I like it. Personally, I like that. I've never actually, even back in the day, like a decade ago, I was never into slipstreaming something that's not really recommended, when it comes to certain applications. Yes, maybe a command line here and there, sure. But I definitely like that turnkey solution again in their ecosystem is obviously a priority, and they just want to shield themselves from anything they can. And apps are obviously a source of huge number
Yeah.
of problems,
Of course,
exploits, and
opens the
whatnot.
door, yeah.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
almost
So
get the impression sometimes when you install third-party apps, like the changes to Plex Media Server. I know this is a basic home user concern, but when they changed the way Plex is installed, and people were like, "What are they doing?" And then, fair play to Synology there. They were
yeah,
towing their own line. They were sticking
yeah,
by their guns and their principles on
yeah,
that. So
yeah,
as annoying
yeah,
as it
yeah,
was for people, it would have been so easy for them to go, "Well, we'll give an exception to that one little app punching holes in
yeah,
my
yeah, yeah.
firewall." So no, fair play to
True,
them. But it's
true.
there is no denying that third-party support from within the application center is more of a priority on QNAP than it is on Synology. But again, to their detriment, in some cases. I mean, again, if I'm about to talk about one of the other, my last point here, and of course it's something we should have touched on already, really, for a lot of people that have looked at QNAP, and that is ZFS. Because Zettabyte file system on QNAP was quite the coup when that was first rolled out. Anyone that ever really wanted to use ZFS, I think we can all say it together, True NAS, or Free NAS, or the Big Shark, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, yeah,
And them including ZFS opened up a lot of features and services to the brand, and they're still really exploring ZFS. Arguably, this is something we've seen before, the brand rolling stuff out, and maybe could have spent a little bit more time in the oven, frankly. But ZFS with inline data deduplication, inline data compression, compaction, particularly important when it comes to SSDs as well, and durability, something from earlier on. Resilvering, limitless volumes by comparison. Obviously, this is prior to the petabyte volume that we discussed. But I always wondered why Synology would not embrace ZFS. It was always a strange one. This isn't really a comparative point, but it was with ZFS being the enterprise darling. I always find it quite strange that they're sticking with BTRFS and ext4 at the enterprise platform, because they have made conscious choices previously when it comes to prioritizing enterprise users' Outlook. I mean, the classic example I've talked about before, and I'm sure the 8 or 9 of you that are still awake listening to this, you're my guys. But when Synology Hybrid RAID first rolled out, and people were like, mwah, beautiful, because the ability to mix and match drive, the ease of expandability, the ease of introducing newer drives, something that which, as far as a video I did yesterday on QNAP, I still don't have a clear answer about, reintroducing larger drives into an old RAID and what happens if you replace all the drives. With SHR, I know the answer, and it's great, but they don't include SHR on the more premium systems at XS above. And when I asked Synology about this, they've said because enterprise level users want the traditional performance levels and traditional response times and redundancy array that is traditional RAID there. So they've clearly looked at the market there and gone, well, SHR is not going for those guys because they don't want it. But those guys want ZFS. So it's really strange to me that Synology have not ever considered, or they presumably considered behind closed doors, but never rolled out a ZFS version of DSM.
I think they've definitely looked. I mean, excellent point on SHR and ZFS. I think they looked at it and they said, if we open this box, we have to do all of these changes to the DSM version for UC controllers as well. That's a separate DSM as well. So maybe the choice was, let's not touch that. Let's leave that to TrueNAS, FreeNAS, and whatnot. And maybe the reason why QNAP is pushing there is not actually countering Synology on one end, but it's actually drawing people from Unraid and from TrueScale, FreeNAS, and whatnot back to that platform, telling them, look, we have the hardware, which is obviously as an appliance better than Synology, and we're offering you ZFS, right? So I think that all in all, Synology probably made a conscious choice not to pursue it, even though enterprise elements and scale out solutions are coming out. But maybe they just said better not to touch it because it's going to be more trouble than it is, or it's going to open a whole
new division. I mean, we're talking about the QNAP position on a lot of stuff to do with third-party hardware and third-party software. I think it would be fair to say, I mean, you've talked about it in some of your reviews before, that a lot of the time our hardware is supplied by the brands themselves, and they make it abundantly clear we can say or do what the hell we want, which is great. I don't know about you, but I never have to send approval or any kind of link in advance. It's just published, do what the hell you want. But when it comes to QNAP, they have the same policy, but I did some videos a while ago showing users how to put TrueNAS on a QNAP. You could use a QNAP that's got like a Celeron processor, 16 gig of memory, and you could put TrueNAS on it, TrueNAS Core and TrueNAS Scale, which was very appealing to people that like the sound of ZFS and like the sound of TrueNAS, but don't like the idea it's not as user-friendly and doesn't have the GUI and all the kind of apps and services. And they didn't want to build a PC with 8 different kinds of warranty. So what they wanted was one solution, one warranty, turnkey, but they wanted TrueNAS. And so I made the video off the basis of that, showing users how to put TrueNAS on it. Now, when I made those videos, one would assume that the brand that supplied that hardware would have come knocking at my door and going, just what the hell do you bloody think you're doing? Because they might wonder, you know, that is almost, if not diluting their brand, then it is actually moving people away from their software and services, licensing and stuff like that, something there is too much of on QNAP as well. I should have added that. But at the same time, they did nothing. And I think some of that content actually got shared on QNAP platforms, which was surprisingly nice for them to not basically be so counter to this idea. Now, one could argue, if you want to be cynical, they're going, they just care about boxes going out the door. You know, there is that counter argument. But at the same time, they're not being opposed to people using the hardware in that way, because it didn't invalidate the warranty from what I could see, because you were using an external drive, you were going in via BIOS, it was fine. But it was just, I'm only bringing it up simply because of that kind of open-ended nature to third-party software that I'm seeing more and more on that QNAP platform there. Again, occasionally to their detriment, and with Synology towing their own line and being quite arguably straight and a courageous one, might argue, that it would be so easy for them to, you know, change small parts of their infrastructure to gain a quick buck, and they're choosing not to do that. There's pros and cons on either side. But I mean, if we were to conclude this video right now, if a user has watched this video all the way through, you eight guys, if you've got all the way to the end and you are still on the fence, if you were to say to someone right now, just a handful of bullet points why they should choose a Synology over a QNAP, what would you say?
Security, stability, turnkey solution, C2 cloud, and overall just better source of applications and platforms. Obviously, active backup as a selling point, just that alone for an end user. So yeah, those will be my bullet points. Yeah.
And from my side, it would be Obviously, hardware there at the top, better third-party support there, just generally better value for money overall, customization, and just generally more scope and more open-ended nature in what you can do with the device and scalability. But this has been a big debate about Synology versus QNAP. We may do another one of these videos. If you feel like there's a point that either one of us missed, and I'm sure there's stuff that you guys might want to disagree with, and put it in the comments below, but let us know. But thank you so much for joining us today, Rusty. Again, links to BlackVoid and his reviews of the 723 and the 923 are below. I strongly recommend checking out that 723 review. It is better than mine. I'm happy to say that.
Oh, no.
I will happily normally do lots of videos on a subject, but you've done one review that is, as far as I'm concerned, the categorical be-all, end-all review of the 723. So if you are considering that NAS, do check it out. Don't worry, I'm not blowing smoke. They can go to mine. My link's going to be above yours. Don't you sweat it. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Have yourself a great week. Click like if you enjoyed the video. It really helps. Click subscribe if you want to learn more. And free advice section over on NAS Compares. Big blue button on the right. The free community support forum on Ask NAS Compares. And check out Syno Forum as well for all your Synology support needs. And of course, if you want to help me out, there are links below to products that we may have discussed. Again, if this video helped you, if you were going to go to those sites anyway, make sure those two things are true. Use those links. It results in a kickback on whatever you buy coming back here to NC, which allows me to continue doing what I do. Thank you so much for watching. See you later, Luca, and we'll catch you guys next time. So real quick, guys, throughout this video, we're just recording this after the video recording. You may notice me drinking out of cups and stuff on the side. I jogged here to work today because, you know, it's January and I'm one of those basic bitches. And right now, I'm so dehydrated, it's unreal. So throughout that video, I apologise for just how much water I drink throughout the course of this video, guys. Let's roll that start.